A 27-year-old convicted openly said that he had no idea of what consent was. Another convict at his 50s said he didn't know women aren't objects or possessions. Another man said, "I never told myself I would rape that woman." And another, the main culprit, just gave away his wife to these monster men. Then they assaulted and raped her as much as they wanted. The husband himself filmed everything to satisfy his own perversion. And remember, here we're not talking about just 3 men, but 51 monsters in total. Chances are they also touched their daughter because, again, the father himself let them do it and filmed it. But apart from all these, Giselle Pelico had a sordid life, a stable job, a beautiful home in Paris, 3 wonderful children, and a husband who, by all appearances, was a devoted father and partner. Her husband, Dominique Pelico, was the kind of man who drove his daughter to school, picked her up late from parties, and even held her when she cried. So how does a man live 2 completely different lives? How does a loving husband and father become such a disturbing monster underneath? And how did no one see it? No warning signs, no whispers, nothing? In this video, we will know everything about it, but the only problem is can you last until the end? Because this case is nauseating, you'd want to throw up, shut down your PC, and put your trust in humanity a little less. Born and raised in France, Dominique Pelico was an average man by all standards. He worked various jobs, electrician, estate agent, nothing out of the ordinary. Giselle, on the other hand, was the real provider, working for years as a manager in a company near Paris. In a quiet town in southeastern France, Pelico and his wife, Giselle, had settled into what looked like an idyllic life. Giselle joined a choir, Pelico took up cycling, and their home, a beautiful house with a sprawling garden and a pool, summers were spent together, nights filled with laughter and long dinners on the terrace. It was the picture of a happy, successful French family. But Giselle's life, as she knew it, had been a carefully constructed illusion. For years, she had been living in a house of horrors without even realizing it. It all started on September 30th, when inside an Leclerc supermarket in Carpentras, Pelico was caught doing something sickening. A security guard spotted him moving suspiciously near female shoppers, positioning his phone at questionable angles. 3 women, unaware of what was happening, became his targets of upskirting, secretly filming under their skirts. Naturally, the guard intervened, stopping him before he could slip away. When police arrived and searched his bag, they didn't just find a phone. They found a camcorder, a camera, and condoms. Why was he carrying those? He claimed it was all a mistake, that he wasn't that kind of man. And then came the excuses. His wife had been away for a month. He had been feeling lonely. It was just a lapse in judgment. But this wasn't a man who had acted on impulse. He had come prepared. So the police weren't about to take his word for it. They seized his digital devices, his phones, his laptop, anything that could hold clues to his real intentions. If this was a one-time thing, as he insisted, they'd find nothing. But surprisingly, it wasn't. What they uncovered was worse than anyone could have imagined, like unleashing hell upon everyone. They found a suspicious folder. At first, it was just strange chat room activity and disturbing messages, but nothing concrete. The odd part was that Dominique Pelico used a weird anonymous pseudonym, à son insu, on the chat site. It meant without her knowledge. The name itself was suspicious enough. Was he hiding something? Because this was a dark corner of the internet where people shared disturbing fantasies. Coco, the website that hosted these chats, wasn't some obscure underground platform. And as investigators dug deeper, they realized Coco wasn't just a chat room for him. He turned it into a hub for something much more sinister. Something that would link it to over 20 criminal cases in France alone. This was a meeting place for men who wanted to drug and violate their partners without consent. And among those men was Dominique Pelico as well. In fact, he was doing more than just talking. He was inviting men to his own home to assault his wife. And instead of only watching, he was documenting everything. Over 1,000 photos and videos, all meticulously categorized. A USB drive filled with horrors, sitting in a folder so blatantly named that it felt like a confession. Abuse. Each one was labeled with specific details, dates, names of perpetrators, descriptions of the acts. Pelico wasn't just keeping a record, then he was creating an archive, like a trophy collection. And at the center of it all was one woman who had no idea any of this was happening to her. Dominique Pelico's wife, Giselle. For months, Giselle had no clue or suspicion, until one day the police asked her to come in for questioning. She thought it was about that upskirting charge against her husband, but she had no idea what she was about to walk into. During interrogation, when the police started asking about her sex life, she was confused. "I don't do partner swapping," she said. "I don't do threesomes. I'm a monogamous woman." And then the officers slid a photograph in front of her. A woman lying unconscious in bed and a man assaulting her fiercely. Giselle just stared at it, confused and disturbed. She didn't recognize the woman, neither the scene. What did this have to do with her husband, she thought. Then the officer spoke. "Look at the bed, look at the bedside table." And then the realization hit her like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just some anonymous victim or a random crime scene. The bed was hers, so was the bedside table, and the woman in the photo was also her. And that was only the beginning. But how could she be in a photo she doesn't remember taking? She tried to recall anything, but the memory is a blank void. The next blow comes swiftly. Routine medical tests, ones she never thought twice about, return with a brutal revelation. She has multiple sexually transmitted infections. The weight of it crushes her. This isn't just betrayal or deception. This is something darker, something monstrous. She understood she couldn't remember any of it because she was drugged to be unconscious, and then her body was used relentlessly like a piece of flesh. And finally, on November 2nd, the man she once called her husband is arrested. The charges are monstrous: aggravated rape, drugging, and a long list of sexual crimes. When the police sit him down for questioning, he doesn't bother to deny it. Rather, he does the only thing he can. He rewrites the story in his own twisted way. He says it started with lorazepam, a prescription for Giselle's anxiety. This had been happening for years, maybe even decades. It was just the first time he got caught. Lorazepam is a sedative meant to calm nerves and ease anxiety. In the right hands, it's medicine. In the wrong hands, it's a weapon. And he knew exactly how to use it. He laced her food, her drinks, ensuring she would drift into an unconscious state. A sleep so deep she wouldn't stir, wouldn't remember. And while she lay there unaware, he did whatever he wanted. He dressed her in outfits she would never wear. He positioned her in ways she would never consent to. He filmed it all. And then, as if that wasn't enough, he even shared it. With a stockpile of pills prescribed in shocking amounts by a doctor who clearly wasn't asking the right questions, he invited others to take part. Others who, like him, saw women not as people but as things to be used, exploited. He never took money for it. That's what he told investigators, as if that made it any less horrifying. But what kind of person even thinks that way? What kind of mind believes that offering his own wife to be violated for free is a sign of moral restraint? Pelico had a system, the method to his madness. The men he invited had to park far from the house. No smoking, no cologne, nothing that could leave a trace. They had to strip in the kitchen, and before touching her, their hands had to be warmed, under the tap or against a radiator. Cold fingers could wake her, and that was the last thing he wanted. But there was one rule above all the others: no condoms. Why? The answer lies in the consequences. And before we get into that, remember to subscribe to this channel, because it'd just take you a moment, but this is the only thing which will fuel our journey. One of the men he brought into his wife's bed was HIV positive. He knew it, and yet he allowed it to happen, not only once, but 6 times. As a result, she contracted an STI. She was lucky it wasn't worse. Once they were done and had taken everything from her, Pelico would clean her body with meticulous precision. The fact that she was unconscious, that she couldn't fight back, that she didn't even know what was happening, that was what made it satisfying for him. Some of the men he invited, he had his relations with them too. And drugs? They were a part of it all. Because she had to stay sedated. She had to stay oblivious. But oblivion can only last so long. The body remembers. Even when the mind refuses to see, the body keeps score. She started wasting away, losing weight, losing hair, losing herself. 10 kilograms vanished from her frame in no time, and it didn't make sense. But she wasn't sick. At least not in a way any doctor could diagnose. But the symptoms kept getting worse. Memory lapses, fatigue kicks in. People around her thought she was developing Alzheimer's. And then there was the morning she woke up with a haircut she didn't remember getting. She stared at her reflection, confused, unsettled. She went to her hairdresser, demanding answers. And what did they say? "You came in yesterday, we cut it." But she hadn't, or at least she had no memory of it, because she had been drugged. And then there was the pain, a deep, relentless ache in her cervix. She knew something was wrong. But Pelico played his role well. He told the doctors she was just overworked and the case was closed. The truth is that doctors also miss the signs. A well-known gynecologist and expert in violence against women later admitted this was a colossal failure. A simple blood test could have shown traces of alprazolam or similar substances. A full gynecological exam might have uncovered damage, but nobody did it. Why? Because it's uncomfortable to think that the danger could be coming from inside the house, from someone trusted, and that's exactly where it was coming from. But when the case hit the courts, things got even darker because some more unknown details came in front. On June 30th, Gweno, an investigating judge from the Avignon Judicial Court, dropped a bombshell indictment. 12 men were charged with rape. One man was charged with attempted rape, another with sexual assault. But that's not all. 5 more were accused of possessing child abuse images. And the suspects? They were nurses, journalists, prison wardens, counselors, soldiers, lorry drivers, farm workers, regular men with regular jobs. In Avignon, France, alongside Dominique Pelico, 50 men stood trial, most denying charges of rape. We even have names of them right here. And they all lived within 50 kilometers of Mazan, where Pelicots lived. These weren't isolated incidents. This was a network of predators hiding in plain sight. But the real question is, how did this go unnoticed for so long? How could so many men connected in some twisted web of abuse operate so openly without anyone noticing? Because people don't want to see it. But the most chilling part wasn't just the crime. When they were confronted with the evidence, they admitted to it. Yes, they raped her, but claimed they never really meant to. Like that's supposed to make it better, and others denied it completely, saying it was just a game, some twisted version of role play. They saw Giselle lying there, unconscious, in positions that no one could voluntarily be in. And yet they still claimed it was all part of some consensual act. But every single one of them had been in contact with Pelico through shady chat rooms. So they knew exactly what they were doing, and yet when they got caught, they shrugged it off as just a mistake. But on October 5th, the Court of Appeal in Avignon shot them down hard. The judges made it clear this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a deliberate act of assault. The evidence was undeniable. The case grew more ridiculous and disturbing when Pelicot's lawyers were spinning the story, trying to make it sound like Giselle was lucky because that most rape victims don't get the kind of public support she did. They even argued that most victims show up to court terrified, completely alone, and get ripped apart by cold-blooded lawyers who seem to take pleasure in tearing their credibility to shreds. But not her. Meanwhile, Pelico ended up in the hospital with a kidney infection and painful kidney stones. So he finally took the stand on September 12th and admitted to it all. He confessed to raping Giselle, but his excuse, he blamed it on sex addiction. He claimed it was uncontrollable, like he was possessed by some dark force he couldn't resist. He said he tried to seek help and even went to a doctor, but nothing worked. But why in such a horrifying way? Pelico claimed it was part pleasure and part insurance. He said he meticulously labeled those recordings because it was a perversion, but also because it helped him remember certain people. Strange logic. But one thing we must admit, those tapes were so detailed, so descriptive, that authorities were able to track down everyone involved. Pelico admitted to drugging her 2 to 3 times a week, for years. When asked if his wife could have ever consented, he flatly admitted, not at all. But Pelico had an explanation, or at least he tried to make one. He claimed it all traced back to his past. When he was 10, he said, a nurse sexually assaulted him while he was in the hospital for a head injury. Then at 16, working as an apprentice on a building site, he claimed he witnessed, and was forced to take part in, the gang rape of a disabled woman. But could a man ever be forced to take part in gang rape? Anyway, he claimed those memories haunted him, that they were too much to bear. But that excuse is nothing to what he did to his wife, the person who loved and trusted him the most. But when investigators found pictures and videos of his daughter-in-law too, for example, there were photos of his daughter dressed in his wife's underwear, Pelico stood firm, denying he ever touched his daughter or grandchildren. He claimed his own childhood trauma made such an idea impossible. But no one believed him. And still, Pelico had one last disturbing statement. He admitted that his ultimate fantasy, the one that drove him to torture his wife, was to dominate an unconscious woman, but without making her suffer. As if unconsciousness erased pain. Naturally, when police confront this kind of monsters, they hand them over to the psychiatrists to know their drives better. When psychiatric experts evaluated him, they described him as a man with almost no empathy, no ability to reflect on his actions, and no sense of responsibility. He treated everyone like objects, things to be used and discarded. His flashy convertible wasn't just a car, it was a symbol of control and dominance, a trophy to show the world he was untouchable. But how did someone so emotionally hollow convince others to follow him down such a dark path? That's where Cyril Delville comes in, a butcher by trade, but his real work was far darker. Cyril admitted to raping Giselle in her own home while his partner, the mother of his children, was away. His excuse, he was sexually frustrated and turned to an online chat room where men talked about raping unconscious women. Because when he was confronted in court, Cyril said he finally understood that women aren't possessions. After 50 years of walking this earth, it took prison for him to realize that. Then there's Lionel Rodriguez, a married father of 3 working a normal job at a local supermarket. On the surface, he seemed like an average guy. He took Giselle shopping at Lionel's store, essentially parading her around like bait. Lionel admitted to raping Giselle on December 2nd, but claimed it wasn't his intention. He even apologized in court, saying, "I never told myself I would rape that woman." Now, what does that even mean? He confessed that he had been sexually abused at 2 years old by the president of a local club. Enter Jacques Coubu, a former fire officer and truck driver turned pizzeria owner. He denied raping Giselle outright, but admitted to touching her while she was unconscious. His excuse, he thought it was a game. Then came Joan Kawai, a French soldier, was in the middle of committing one of the most horrific acts imaginable while his partner was in the hospital, bringing their child into the world. Kawai admitted it in court. He assaulted Giselle twice, and the worst part? He claimed he didn't know what consent was. Jean-Pierre Maréchal wasn't just another participant, he was a disciple. A former lorry driver from southern France, Jean-Pierre admitted to drugging and raping his own wife with Pelico. This wasn't a one-off event, it happened repeatedly between 2010 and 2012. And when his wife woke up during one of the assaults, Pelico didn't stop because he felt guilty. He stopped because getting caught would ruin the operation. Jean-Pierre's childhood was brutal. Raised in the French countryside, he faced extreme poverty and sexual abuse within his own family. He once told his kids, "I was raised by pigs in the woods." Psychiatrists also described him as manipulative, lacking empathy, and incapable of taking responsibility. Another rapist, Hughes Malago, claimed he didn't know Giselle was drugged. Hughes, a tire salesman and motorbike enthusiast, was accused of attempted rape just days before his girlfriend's birthday. He admitted to touching Giselle but claimed he hadn't even looked at her face, just her body, as if it was a great defense. His ex-girlfriend, Emily, testified that she feared she had also been drugged and assaulted by Hughes. She remembered waking up one night to find him on top of her. She filed a police complaint, but it got tossed out for lack of evidence. And yet here he was, sitting in court, accused of doing the exact same thing to Giselle. In court, Giselle finally took the stand and she didn't hold back. She faced down the men who violated her. She wanted justice, not just for herself, but for every victim who felt too ashamed to speak up. However, throughout the trial that shocked France, Pelico and Gisela's daughter, Caroline Derain's claims barely got attention. Prosecutors said there wasn't enough evidence, no objective elements to prove she was drugged or assaulted. The focus stayed on her mother, Giselle, whose suffering was backed by those countless videos. But Caroline knew what she felt, like the trial's invisible victim. She told the BBC, "I know he drugged me, probably for sexual abuse, but I don't have evidence." Her courtroom clashes with her father were explosive, him pleading, "I never touched you," her shouting back, "You are lying." And then Pelicot's own son, David, stood up. He pointed to his father and said, "That man will never be part of my family again." David even said they had destroyed every photo of Pelico, wiped him from their history. His youngest brother also called Pelicot dead to me and asked the court to impose the harshest sentence possible. So what did the court decide? Did Pelico and the others finally get what they deserved? The court was initially left stunned, but then the judge dropped a statement that cut deeper than any verdict. This trial wasn't just about one man's guilt. It was about the entire society's relationship with power, control, and women. But that was only the beginning. As the trial unfolded, protests erupted across France. On September 15th, feminist groups flooded the streets, Paris, Marseille, holding signs, chanting Giselle's name. They weren't just angry about Pelico. They were angry about what he represented, the rising tide of sexual violence that women had been drowning under for years. But wait, the case has some more darker colors to reveal. December 16th, one 23-year-old real estate agent named Sophie Narm was found naked and strangled in an apartment she was showing. At first, police thought it was the work of serial killer Michael Fourniret. But years later, DNA linked the crime to someone else, Dominique Pelico. That revelation shattered the case wide open. Pelicot denied it, of course, but with his history, would anyone really be surprised? And then May 16th, another woman, a 19-year-old real estate agent named Estella B., was also attacked while showing an apartment in Villiers-le-Bel. This time, the victim fought back and managed to escape. But when police tested the DNA found on her shoes, it was none but Pelicot's. So basically, who was that average-looking normal guy, Dominique Pelico? Not a family man, but a serial rapist and a serial killer. No doubt, in the trial, he and 50 other men were convicted, receiving a combined 428 years. Dominique Pelico, at 72, was sentenced to 20 years for drugging and repeatedly raping his ex-wife, Giselle Pelico, which means he will most likely never walk free again. But Dominique isn't alone. How many more like him are still out there, creeping out in those chat rooms and raping and documenting women like monsters? Share your thoughts with us in the comments, and while this case showed the heinous monstrosity on women, the next case I have for you will show another gruesome acts done by women. And they also did it for fun, darker fantasies like games, addiction, and trauma of abuse. The only thing different is how their crime unfolded, comparable to any Oscar-nominated Hollywood thriller. Watch this video to know about it more. Subscribe to the channel for more. See you soon.